Well, hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's great to be with you on this Friday, March 11th, and here's some of what we're talking about tonight. President Biden raises the stakes on Russia by suspending all normal trade relations. We'll walk through how this could affect you. Russian forces continue to hit already devastated areas of Ukraine. Russia's former foreign minister joins us with his thoughts on Vladimir Putin. Ukraine was once the third largest nuclear power in the world. It gave up those weapons for a reason. But how different would things be today if it still had them? A primer on Ukraine's nuclear history coming up. Plus, Russian disinformation makes its way to TikTok. How can you tell if a social media post about this crisis can be trusted? And Russia's war against Ukraine is having a big impact on Earth and in space. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that Russia has kidnapped the mayor of Melitopol, a city in the southeastern part of the country. Mayor Ivan Fedorov was reportedly still working in the city council despite the arrival of Russian forces.
Тому захоплення мера Мелітополя – це злочин не тільки проти конкретної людини, не тільки проти конкретної громади, не тільки проти України. Це злочин проти демократії як такої.
Russia continues to expand their attacks and are now advancing further west than ever before. Today, multiple airstrikes hit the cities of Lutsk and Ivano-Frankivsk, which are in the western part of the country. Those cities have not been hit since the first day of the invasion. The mayor of Lutsk says strikes killed 4 service members and wounded another 6. The city of Dnipro was also bombarded. Officials there say a series of airstrikes hit a shoe factory, a kindergarten, and an apartment building. Around the same time, President Biden was announcing an end to normal trade relations in Russia, joining the European Union and G7 nations in raising tariffs on Russian products, among other things.
The G7 will seek to deny Russia the ability to borrow from leading multinational institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Putin is an aggressor. He is the aggressor, and Putin must pay the price.
Meanwhile, tensions remain high in Kyiv. Satellite images appear to show that a Russian military convoy close to Kyiv has dispersed, raising concerns that Russian forces are preparing for an imminent ground attack. U.S. officials say it'll take maybe a month for Russia to occupy the city if successful. NBC's Cal Perry starts us off tonight in Lviv, Ukraine. And Cal, let's start with those airstrikes in Lutsk and Ivano-Frankivsk. I believe we have a map that shows exactly where they are. Why is Russia targeting that area now?
Well, the thinking is that this is a vital airfield in the western part of the country that is helping to supply the effort in the east. These are the first airstrikes we've had this far west since the first day of the war. And it is also the proximity to Poland that makes this interesting. There was some thinking that Putin maybe not would hit these sites because they are so close to the European Union border. They're so close to that NATO border. But this morning, clearly, those strikes he deemed necessary. The other thing that it does here is it is unnerving for the people who live here in Lviv. This is a city that normally has a population of 700,000. It is now closer to 1 million. Most of those folks, those 300,000 people, have been displaced from areas in the east. And so when the air sirens went off this morning, there was sort of a renewed sense of urgency because this was, as I said, the first time since the war began that we had actual airstrikes in this part of the country, Joshua.
Cal, how are people in Lviv preparing for the possibility of Russian attacks?
So I think what we're seeing here is probably what my colleague Richard Engel saw in the Capitol a few weeks ago. We're seeing a hardening of positions. That is, checkpoints that existed on the outskirts of town are now becoming permanent checkpoints. As you come closer into the city, we're starting to see more of those, for example, hedgehogs, those big iron sort of clad devices that they put in the road that stop the armored personnel carriers. So you have a city that is preparing for a possible ground invasion. You also have, and we've seen this across across the country, citizens, everyday civilians, who are now preparing to arm themselves to try to protect their homes. I had a chance to speak to a computer programmer about his sort of story and how he's preparing for Russian invasion at a gun store. This gun store, I should tell you, has sold 2/3 of their stock up until today. There's been a rush on guns here. Here's a little bit more of what he had to say.
My family is here. I have things to lose here, and escaping to somewhere else, it might be an option for young kids, for women, right? But in the end of the day, if everyone will leave, who's going to be here? So why those guys are dying there on the east, on the whole country? Why they are dying? For what? For us escaping from here? I don't see the point of doing this. Myself, I'm not a soldier, right? I don't know how to shoot people. I don't know how to act in this kind of situations. But if it will come here, then I have no option.
There has been such a surreal nature to this story. 3 weeks ago, the president of Ukraine saying an invasion wouldn't be likely, and now you have close to the European border, close to that border with NATO, citizens, everyday civilians arming themselves, thinking that the Russians could, in fact, come this far west, even with their ground troops, Joshua.
So, Cal, that's what's happening in Lviv, which is in western Ukraine, close to the border with Poland. What about in eastern Ukraine? I mean, President Zelensky has said that as many as 100,000 civilians have been safely evacuated from hard-hit areas, but in cities that are further to the south, near the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea, like Odessa and Mariupol, it seems like a rather different story. How is it going there?
Yeah, it's not going well. I mean, Mariupol has not had any food or water delivered to that city in over a week, and no civilians have gotten out. Every single one of those humanitarian corridors has failed. There was some success today. About 8,000 civilians were evacuated from an area in the north. But your point about these Black Sea cities, and then we hear tonight from the president that along that Black Sea in one of those cities, the mayor has been abducted. That's where some of the fiercest fighting is taking place. In Mariupol particularly, we're seeing now pictures of these mass graves being dug, you know, an indication that people are so desperate that they're not able to get above ground long enough to carry out a funeral. It's even worse in Kyiv. In Kyiv, the bodies are being left in the streets. The mayor there says that over a 24-hour period of time, there was close to 90 airstrikes. Again, just an indication of how horrible the situation is there when you have people without power, without water, without heat, and not even being able to get outside. You get an indication of how fierce that bombardment is.
Before I let you go, Cal, I just want to get to one other piece of President Zelensky's Telegram video that he posted. We showed part of it at the beginning of this segment, but in the end of it, he speaks in Russian, directly to the Russian people, including Russian mothers, asking them to check up on their sons to see if they have been conscripted to come fight in Ukraine, to check up on them and saying that if you have any doubt or any suspicion that your son could be sent to fight, to act. What do you think is the optimism, the outlook among people in Lviv that this can end well, that this could end maybe without them being dragged into this fighting?
I think people are holding out hope. They're holding out hope that the West and particularly NATO will step in. That we hear more and more of that as this conflict drags on, that NATO needs to implement that no-fly zone. And if that no-fly zone is implemented, I think this city will feel quite a bit safer. It is interesting that President Zelensky, to say the least, interesting that he does this in Russian. This is now the 4th time that he's gone out of his way to speak directly to the Russian people. And what he's doing is he's countering directly what it is they are hearing on their state TV. He's putting it on Telegram, for obvious reasons. I mean, there's no other way that speech would be seen in Russian unless people got it off social media, got it off Telegram. So he's trying to counter this narrative that the Russians are putting out to their own people. Yesterday, he tried to counter it by talking about the reality of the chemical weapons. Today, he's talking about the reality of what Russian soldiers are facing here on the ground, or at least the reality that he wants Russian mothers to face. It is something that he has done and he will do in the future. And it is also a way to rally people here. When people hear the president speaking Russian to the Russian people, it is a way to unite this country. And it's something, certainly, Joshua, a feeling that he's been able to tap into since the start of this war.
Thank you, Cal. Please do stay safe. That's NBC's Cal Perry starting us off again tonight from Lviv in western Ukraine. Let's continue now with Andrei Kozyrev. He was Russia's foreign minister from 1991 to 1996. He's also the author of the memoir the Firebird. Mr. Kozyrev, welcome to the program. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, sir. It's my pleasure.
I would love to get your sense of the mentality of Vladimir Putin and his strategy. I think a lot of people have been asking, is he rational? Is he all there? Why would he do something that doesn't make so much sense? And to me, at least, that feels like a very Western democracy lens on a very different kind of culture that is too narrow to fully understand someone who doesn't view the world the way we view it in the United States. What is your sense of the thought process behind what Vladimir Putin is doing right now?
First of all, I agree with you, with your analysis, and I can add to that for any normal person, be it there or here, it looks like a lunatic acting because he is detached from reality. He is detached from reality in Russia. He is sitting alone at the end of the long tables, as you see, even speaking to his closest associates and acolytes probably. He keeps unbelievable distance because he is afraid, he is isolated, and he is delusional. He has no idea of reality either in Russia or in Ukraine, where he thought of a very quick and easy victory and did not expect that there is actually a Ukrainian nation and this nation will defend itself. And he thought that the West, the United States, are weak, decadent, and that they will not stand for the international norms. So if he is a genius, like some people say, even here in America, then who is imbecile?
I understand that you have called this war disastrous, and I hear the reasons that you've just given, including perhaps dramatically underestimating the resolve of the Ukrainian people. In terms of the end game, as President Putin might see it, we've heard from some of our other guests, including one who's coming up a little bit later, that this is all kind of part of an effort to sort of rebuild the glory of the Soviet Union or bring that back to the height of its strength, at least as he sees it. You were in the administration in the years right after the fall of the Soviet Union. Can you talk more about that in terms of what it is that he might be envisioning or imagining or trying to bring back as he sees it?
Yes, again, this image is also detached from reality. The Soviet Union was as giant on heels of clay or legs of clay as today's Russia. It looked like a giant, but it was weak economically. It was totally dependent on oil and gas exports at that time. And Russia is still over-dependent, probably even more dependent, believe it or not. After 20 years of President Putin's rule, it's still more dependent on export of raw materials than the Soviet Union was. And it does not produce anything like Soviet Union did not produce anything but vodka and caviar. And President Biden is absolutely correct to forbid the import of vodka, Russian vodka. There are many other vodkas. I mean, it's delusional idea that the Soviet Union was a paradise on earth. I grew up in the Soviet Union and lived there till 40 probably. And I was not much impressed. And when I first visited a foreign country, especially New York in 1975, I was overwhelmed that people, just ordinary people on the streets, could have ability to go to a supermarket and to choose whatever they want to buy, while in the Soviet Union, you did not choose what to buy. You were asking for food, not for a cheese or something for food.
Right. I wonder if I could get you to respond in the time we have left to something we heard from Avril Haines, who is the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, about nuclear weapons. We'll talk more about this in just a moment, but I'd like to get your reaction to something that she said during a Senate hearing yesterday. Watch.
As a general matter, as I indicated, we're obviously very concerned, want to make sure that we're monitoring everything that may be going on with respect to Russia's strategic nuclear forces.
I wonder just briefly what you make of the saber rattling that Vladimir Putin made on day one of this invasion, where he basically said, we're a nuclear power, you guys better not mess with us. What do you make of the potential for some kind of a larger nuclear threat from all of this?
You know what? Putin knows no less than we know that any attack to the United States with nuclear weapons would immediately be retaliated. And that means that to actually initiate this kind of exchange, he should be suicidal, because it is suicidal act, because he will receive it back in enormous proportions, and there is no way to survive. So, but he does not look suicidal to me. He looks adventurous, looks womanizing, because he likes ladies, and Moscow is full of rumors about that. He is divorced, so it's probably okay. And he is bon vivant. He starts his day, he said himself, like swimming in a large pool there in Kremlin. You know, this guy does not look like suicidal to me. And he has 2 daughters and probably grandchildren. So, I mean, again, no suicidal person I see, but I see someone who wants to intimidate America, intimidate NATO, intimidate Ukrainians. And that's why he is brandishing these nuclear weapons and this threat. And you know what? If JFK gave Khrushchev at that time an appearance that he is more afraid of nuclear war than Khrushchev, the missiles will be in Cuba till today.
Andrei Kozyrev, Russia's foreign minister from 1990 to 1996. I appreciate you making time for us tonight, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Still to come, the U.S. made sure that Ukraine gave its nuclear weapons back to Russia nearly 30 years ago. How is that move playing into the war right now? We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. Ever since this war started, there's been a lot of concern about Russia's nuclear arsenal and a lot of discussion about Ukraine's lack thereof. Why doesn't Ukraine have nuclear weapons? Well, it used to. When the Soviet Union fell in 1991, it left nuclear arms scattered across former Soviet states, and Ukraine was one of them. Suddenly, it became the 3rd largest nuclear power in the world, behind the United States and Russia. Ukraine inherited nearly 5,000 nuclear weapons from Moscow. Some of those were the kinds of long-range nukes that could wipe out cities. Some members of Ukraine's parliament recognized at the time that nuclear weapons gave them leverage. They didn't want to give that up. But officials eventually relented under international pressure, especially from the U.S. That's when negotiations began to denuclearize Ukraine. The U.S., the U.K., and Russia were at the heart of these talks, convincing Ukraine to return the nukes to Russia. And in 1994, those 4 countries signed what is now known as the Budapest Memorandum. They promised that none of those nations would use force or threats against Ukraine, and they promised to respect their sovereignty and existing borders. Promised, but did not guarantee. The Budapest Memorandum also stated that if Ukraine was ever attacked, the U.S. and the U.K. would come to their rescue. Again, not a guarantee. Fast forward 20 years. Russia invades Crimea in blatant violation of the Budapest Memorandum. Ukraine immediately called a meeting of the signatories of the memorandum. They agreed to meet in Paris. Russia never showed up. Reason being, this was not Boris Yeltsin's Russia that signed the memorandum. This was Vladimir Putin's Russia. Which brings us to today. Russia has invaded Ukraine for the second time in 8 years. If Ukraine had kept those nukes, would they be in this situation? And perhaps more to the point, if you make a promise without a guarantee, was it ever really a promise at all? Let's get into that with NBC News analyst Michael McFaul. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Russia. Ambassador, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Good to be back.
Can we zero in a little bit more on this memorandum? What was in it, apart from those assurances? Were there any other big details that are worth noting?
No, I thought you did a brilliant job of summarizing it. I think that the thing you're hinting at, but let's be clear, is this was not a treaty. You called it right, a memorandum. There were no guarantees in a legalistic sense that was ratified by the three parties. But of course, at the time when they all signed it, they all believed that everybody was going to recognize Ukraine's independence. And obviously, Vladimir Putin violated the Budapest Memorandum back in 2014, and he's upped the ante, of course, in a much more horrific way, violating that memorandum with this war that he launched 3 weeks ago.
Talk a little bit more about the mentality of the parties at the time. I mean, it seems like a lot to give back your nuclear weapons on a pinky swear without any kind of guarantee that, like, okay, you're really going to do this, right? But was this the beginning of what might have been a larger process to set up some kind of like formal agreements or treaties, or did everyone kind of consider it done once the Budapest Memorandum was signed?
Well, I think there's two things to remember about that era. First, it was the end of the Soviet Union. It was the time when both Ukraine and Russia were democracies. We obviously were a democracy. And, you know, we thought all countries were going to be democracies, and democracies don't fight each other. Democracies don't invade each other. So I think that's an important thing to remember. Back in the early 90s, that was the euphoric time that we were living in. Tragically, we know what happened in Russia when they started to move away from democracy, when Vladimir Putin took over, was elected, but appointed by Yeltsin, by the way, the very guy that you just were showing that signed it on behalf of democratic Russia, was the one that appointed him prime minister and then appointed him acting president. You know, in essence, he was the one that chose Putin to be the next president. A horrific, horrific mistake. I think will go down in history as one of the most strategic errors ever, because Putin then unraveled democracy inside Russia. And that's part of the, you know, that's the essence of the battle between Russia and Ukraine today. It's about autocratic Russia trying to roll back democratic Ukraine. But the second thing you need to add that frequently gets lost is at the same time that they were signing that, there was something called the Nunn-Lugar Agreement, conventional threat reduction, whereby we gave both Russia and Ukraine and Kazakhstan, by the way, they also gave up their nuclear weapons, don't forget. And in return, we also gave them billions of dollars to try to destroy those weapons in a safe way. So that was part of the quid pro quo back in the early 1990s.
With regard to kind of where this puts us now, the question of what if they had their nukes, I really struggle with that question, because I'm not even sure that's the right framing for the question. You know what I mean? Like, if they had their nukes, it doesn't necessarily mean that they would never have threatened other nations with them. Who knows what the political trajectory of Ukraine would have been like under that circumstance? I mean, the butterfly effect is a law of science for a reason. So I don't even know if that's an answerable question. But how do you see it?
It's a good point. We don't know. That's a counter, in political science, we call that a counterfactual, right? What if they would have kept the weapons? Would things have been different? You know, there's a big assumption in this argument, too, that just holding on to those weapons, they could have made them useful and operational. that's a questionable assumption as well. And remember, to retain and maintain nuclear weapons also costs a lot of money. Ukraine didn't have a lot of money in 1994 when they signed that. But let's face it, it didn't happen. We are talking about counterfactuals. I think the real implication of the violation of the Budapest Memorandum is for other countries either that have nuclear weapons that we want to have them give them up, thinking of North Korea, or countries that we want to deter from acquiring them and obtaining usable nuclear weapons like Iran. When you look at what happened with Putin invading, and you have the potential either to keep the nuclear weapons you have or to develop them, you're going to think twice before you sign any treaty. And most certainly you're going to think twice before you sign something called a memorandum.
I wonder if I could track back to something that the former Russian foreign minister, Andrei Kozyrev, said in our last segment. He was foreign minister in much of Boris Yeltsin's time. Yeah. And we asked him, what do you think about, we asked him, what do you think about the prospect of whether Vladimir Putin was just saber rattling when he said, we've got nukes, don't bug us. And he said he's not suicidal. I tend to get that because if Vladimir Putin's aim is actually to kind of see the reunited glory of the Soviet Union, I think he wants to survive long enough to see his statue go up in Red Square, right? I don't think he would do this as a suicide mission. But what do you think? I hear where the former foreign minister is coming from, but how do you see it?
Well, I was alarmed when he said he was putting his forces on a higher alert. And even if the probability of a nuclear war, let's say it went up from 0.5% to 0.6%, I want the U.S. government and all leaders of the world, because a nuclear war affects the entire planet, let's be clear about that, not just the United States and Russia, to do whatever they can to push that probability down, right? So I want General Milley, for instance, to be calling his counterpart, General Gerasimov, to say, could you please clarify, are you changing your doctrine here? They just in January, just so you know, signed a document saying we all understand that wars, nuclear wars, are unwinnable and should never be approached. I want Xi Jinping to make that phone call too. He's the one guy that Putin listens to. But I also agree with the foreign minister. By the way, I wrote the preface to his memoir, so I've watched and known him for a long time. I think we met first in 1990. He was a fantastic foreign minister for Russia. I also think what he says is correct. He's unnerved, he's daring, he does things for ideological purposes, not just a kind of rational actor, but he's not suicidal. I helped to negotiate the last nuclear arms control agreement that we have with Russia. It's called the New START Treaty. And we brought the number of nuclear weapons down by 30%. It was a great achievement. But this cap in that treaty is still 1,550 nuclear weapons on each side. That means we still have in place mutual assured destruction. And that means that if he launches against us, that means there's a nuclear war where everybody dies. I don't think Putin is suicidal, and I don't predict that will happen.
Ambassador Michael McFaul, always good talking to you, sir. Thanks very much.
Right. Good to see you. Bye-bye.
In another sign of that broken promise, Russian military activity is picking up around Kyiv. Ukrainians fighting for their city are preparing for several scenarios. So far, they're holding their own. From our partners at Sky News, Alex Crawford has more.
Russian tanks and other armored vehicles in an eastern suburb of Kyiv, now abandoned and damaged, but gleefully driven by the Ukrainians who ambushed them and pushed the troops into retreat. But this is demonstrable evidence the Russian military is on the move and trying several different routes to get into the capital. The Ukrainians are grasping this as an opportunity to emphasize just how capable they are of defending their main city. The drone footage released by Ukraine's armed forces is now being lauded as a tremendous military defense. In the footage, the Russians come under repeated attack, with soldiers running for cover, rockets frantically fired in this built-up area. It's the main eastern highway leading directly into the center of the capital. The battle has left military debris scattered all over the E95 road, which may also help in hindering Russian progress.
You can still see smoke in the distance where the Russian tanks managed to get to. They're trying to hold them back, but they're very worried that they're going to try and make a push from here or, again, try down this main road into Brovary.
But the activity around the capital's outskirts has definitely picked up over the past 24 hours. These pictures, filmed by journalists with Ukrainian soldiers, appear to show the troops under fire as they engage their Russian counterparts, apparently in a village in the greater Kyiv area. We were invited to see some of the casualties in Brovary, a number of them children, including a 14-year-old girl shot whilst fleeing in a car with her family. The bullets hit her hand and shoulder. She's only a teenager and was with her 4-year-old brother, grandmother and parents. We were driving down the main road from my grandmother's, she says, and they just started shooting at us. Her father, Sergei, had part of his hand blown away. He and his family are lucky to survive. He told us the Russian troops seemed very panicky. To me, they were scared, he said, and they shot everything that moved. There's increased tension around the capital and soldiers are wary of everyone. They suspect Russian saboteurs might be posing as journalists.
He's Russian journalist.
And they're on the hunt for one in particular. The hospital staff are edgy too and have found themselves treating some soldiers, but overwhelmingly their patients are civilian casualties. It's very hard, physically and emotionally, he says, to see young people being crippled and dying for no reason. The Russian Defense Ministry released these pictures, claiming to show their troops moving inside the wider Kyiv region. They are thought to be regrouping and repositioning to encircle the capital before launching a prolonged attack on the city centre, probably within days. But the man with hero status in Ukraine for raising millions to support their armed forces insists they're ready.
We will fight from every window. We will fight from every basement. We have enough anti-tank missiles. Thanks for our allies from the United Kingdom, from the United States. So they will lose tanks every street, every block, every crossroads.
There are more and more barricades going up in and around the capital. They're digging trenches, and this is in the middle of the city, although we're not showing the location for security reasons. Either way, soldiers and civilians are preparing for either attack or siege.
They have created a whole network of these trenches, as much as protection, but also from where they can mount fighting positions.
They've been taking on Russian troops around several points on the edges of the capital, but there's a growing expectation that the city is headed into a very grim few days or weeks. Alex Crawford, Sky News, Kyiv.
We'll return to Ukraine in a moment, and we'll get to more of today's big stories. Tens of millions of Americans are in the path of a massive winter storm. Al Roker has your weekend forecast. And another state is proposing a bill to curtail school discussions of gender identity and sexual orientation. Your headlines are just ahead. Stay close. Let's begin our headlines with the reason I'm congested tonight, the weather. Forecasters are watching a big winter storm making its way east this weekend. Millions of people from Texas to Maine are in its path. Al Roker has your forecast. Hey, Al.
Joshua, to give you an example of the power of this storm, 24 hours ago, I'm here in Austin right now. It was a beautiful day, 76 degrees, balmy conditions. And today, we got wind chills of 32 degrees and wind gusts of 35 miles per hour. And this is just the back end of a system that extends 2,000 miles all the way into the Northeast. We've got a lot going on. 130 million people are under some sort of winter weather watch, warning, flood warning, or wind warning. And it stretches from Texas all the way into New England and back into Florida. So 17 million people at risk for severe weather, wind gusts of up to 75 miles per hour. What I'm most concerned about, nocturnal tornadoes tornadoes, twice as deadly as the daytime variety. You can see already strong storms firing up across the northern third of Florida, on into the southeastern Atlantic coast, and snow stretching from Arkansas all the way up into Cleveland. Overnight, rain, wind, heavy snow and storms battering the east. This low pressure system bombs out. In other words, it drops 24 millibars in 24 hours. That's the definition. This one's going to drop 80 millibars in 48 hours. As it continues to push off the coast, dragging in much colder air, we're going to be looking at snow, blustery conditions for New England, severe storms across the southeast in the morning. As far as the snow is concerned, inland New York State up into New England, we could be looking at up to 12 inches of snow, but generally anywhere from 3 to 6 inches from Beckley, West Virginia to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. As we slide to the south, we're worrying about gusty winds and heavy rain, mid-Atlantic states all the way down into the Florida Panhandle, where there could be upwards of 4 inches of rain, Joshua, and that could lead to some flash flooding. But the big problem's going to be the winds and the dangerous road conditions and airport delays up and down the eastern seaboard. Joshua?
Al Roker, thank you, sir. The legal fight continues over Texas's crackdown on care for transgender children. About 2 weeks ago, Republican Governor Greg Abbott sent a controversial order to the state's Department of Family and Protective Services. They have been investigating the parents of transgender youth for child abuse. This evening, a Texas judge blocked that directive. According to the Texas Tribune, a district judge said Governor Abbott's directive was, quote, beyond the scope of his authority and unconstitutional, unquote. A statewide injunction will remain in effect until July, when this case is heard in court. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton tweeted that he will appeal the ruling, calling this a fight to protect Texas children. Meanwhile, in Georgia, state lawmakers have introduced a bill modeled after a controversial measure in Florida, what critics are calling the Don't Say Gay bill. The Georgia measure is called the Common Humanity in Private Education Act. It would prohibit discussions about gender identity and sexual orientation in some private school classrooms. Florida's bill focuses on public schools, and that measure passed the Florida State Senate on Tuesday. Republican Governor Ron DeSantis seems inclined to sign it into law. One hot-button issue around the bill, the response to it from the Walt Disney Company. It employs 80,000 Floridians, mostly at Walt Disney World. On Wednesday, CEO Bob Chapek came out against the bill. Today, he said Disney was pausing donations to Florida politicians while it reassesses its approach to advocacy. No doubt Disney would rather be focusing on its new Pixar movie right now. Turning Red is about the growing pains of a Chinese-Canadian girl. Stories like this could shape how kids think about Asian Americans, and that could help address a rapid rise in anti-Asian violence. The group Stop AAPI Hate recorded almost 11,000 hate incidents against these communities from early in the pandemic to the end of last year. That is up 339% from the year before. Cultural awareness makes a difference in the movies and in the classroom. And that is why 3 high schoolers in New Jersey decided to do something about it.
All 3 of us were friends since elementary, middle school.
Russell, Eric, and Ishan grew up together in Livingston, New Jersey.
I love working with them, especially since we do believe in the idea of Asian American studies in our curriculum.
Now, as high school seniors, they've been rallying for the state to require Asian American and Pacific Islander history classes.
After the Atlanta shootings back in March of 2021, we still see so many attacks against AAPI individuals happening. I mean, Michelle Go was attacked on the train, and then Christina Yuna Lee was stabbed in her apartment. I felt that the main factor that contributed to these hate crimes and attacks was the lack of understanding of the AAPI community, whether it's through their culture or their history.
Asian Americans weren't really set into the curriculum, and we had to do our own research if we wanted to learn more about that.
Asian Americans at times are not seen oftentimes as Americans themselves.
Back in January, New Jersey's Governor Phil Murphy approved a curriculum mandate
for the inclusion of knowledge about the various contributions that Asian Americans have made to America.
The beauty of something like this bill being passed and a mandate is it does put it on the forefront and begins to actually mobilize resources to actually help assist educators in getting the materials together that they can actually use in the classroom.
New Jersey is the second state to specifically require AAPI history in schools. Illinois was the first, and other states are considering similar bills.
It's about the fact that multiculturalism and talking about race and ensuring that our students and our young people have opportunities to honor and talk about their history is recognized in schools.
And over time, these proposals might help major cities reduce an ongoing spike in anti-Asian hate crimes.
I definitely have concerns with safety. We were going to go to a trip to New York City, but after learning about what happened with her, it definitely made us fear about going to New York City.
That's just how much it affected our personal lives.
And I think that the root of these problems is just people simply just not being educated on them.
I think the better word to use is awareness. No one's really born with the intention of, oh, I'm going to carry out a hate crime and be uneducated. I think it's just the fact that there is this lack of content in the institution.
The best thing about this bill is that it's quite hopeful. The fact that so many people were able to rally around this issue. History is a story.
History is awareness.
History is acceptance.
Before we go, two more impacts of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The growth of misinformation on social media, forget about your uncle on Facebook. Generation Z is also struggling to tell fact from fiction. And the invasion is affecting Russia's partnerships on Earth and beyond. Misinformation is nothing new in times of war, but social media is making it even more insidious, especially for younger users. That's why some folks on platforms like TikTok are working to make sure their peers do not get fooled.
Isn't as digitally literate as we think we are, and it's important to understand this. In regards to misinformation, the majority of young people aren't going to legacy media for news. They're going to social media. All generations are victims of misinformation on social media, but Gen Z is particularly great at giving misinformation more reach.
Preparing young people to be shrewd about social media is vital. Pew Research says 42% of people under the age of 30 say they often get their news there. Everyone else leans more toward news organizations' websites or apps. And the White House is realizing this. According to the Washington Post, the Biden administration has briefed top TikTok users on Ukraine developments. Some of their posts can reach hundreds of thousands or millions of viewers. The Kremlin realizes this too. According to Vice News, the Russian government is paying TikTok users to spread information. The youth and internet culture reporter Callan Rosenblatt joins us now with more. And Callan, put a finer point on just how pervasive this is. I think we all kind of know the old stereotype about, oh, your weird aunt and uncle are sharing screwy things on Facebook. But this isn't just the kind of thing that affects people who are maybe more gullible and did not grow up with digital technology. This affects digital natives as well.
Absolutely. Digital natives are just as susceptible to misinformation as Gen Xers or their baby boomer parents. I mean, experts I spoke with basically told me misinformation has like no age range for the people who it affects. And we see new ways misinformation sort of pervading the internet. We have TikTok, where information is coming so fast and furious, and young people are really susceptible to what they see on TikTok. People speak authoritatively. It seems like they know what they're talking about, or they see an infographic that's on Instagram and it looks professional and it displays information in a way that seems authoritative. And we know that is not always the case, that it is factual or correct. And so young people have to really up their media literacy and their news literacy in order to make sure they're not falling for these falsehoods or this misinformation that is presented in a way that sometimes seems very credible.
I want to get to media literacy in just a second, but talk more about TikTok in particular. I didn't know until today, really, that people who use TikTok spend way more time on that app per day than people who use Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. We're talking about the difference between like 30 some odd minutes a day and like 90 minutes a day. TikTok is one of the deeper rabbit holes online. How is TikTok in particular dealing with fact checking and fighting misinformation?
Yeah, TikTok is a really easy tool to be on and realize, like, 3 hours have passed. I'm very guilty of that myself, having been on the app and then realizing like, oh gosh, all this time has gone by. But TikTok is pairing with fact-checking organizations like AAPI, and they are asking them to help them suss out misinformation. And their community guidelines says you can't post something that's factually incorrect or purports to be incorrect. They also have a banner that goes along the bottom of issues like COVID-19 or politics that sends people to a landing page that will help them get more credible information. But it's a fire hose. It is relentless information. And on TikTok, you don't need to necessarily be following someone to see a post by them. So if, let's say, a person who posts a lot of conspiracy theories has a video that's getting really high engagement, the algorithm could still put that video into your For You page without you ever having followed that person. So there's still a chance that you're going to be affected by misinformation, even if you follow exclusively credible accounts. So you have to be really careful about, what you are believing when it comes to TikTok, even though the platform itself is trying to combat this.
How do you deal with misinformation online, particularly, Callan, as you are kind of working your way through posts, trying to verify them, trying to figure out what's trustworthy? I know we have a whole process here at NBC News, but what are some of the things that factor into that?
Yeah, so, I'm really lucky as an NBC News reporter that we have so many resources within the building, like our social news gathering team, which can double check videos for us and make sure that they're credible and factual. When I'm on my own, something I will do is really simple Google searches. That can be really helpful rather than just believing something at face value. And sort of Googling, has a credible news organization covered this image or this story that I'm thinking of covering or that I'm looking at? I will do reverse image searches to see, is the image that is purporting to be about a certain topic, like Ukraine, has it been used before? Is it from a year that predates the current one that we're in? And a lot of these tools that are really easily accessible will help me to determine whether or not something is credible. There's also a fantastic resource called the News Literacy Project, which is helping not only me, but young people determine what tools they can use to best identify fact from fiction. And I highly recommend that people check out the News Literacy Project in order to learn what tools they can use in their day-to-day life while they're perusing social media to help them determine what is misinformation and what is factual.
News Literacy Project is fabulous. We also have a resource here at NBC called the NBCU Academy. The cover story right now at NBCUacademy.com is called How Do Reporters Verify Social Media About Ukraine? So there are ways to tell if what you're looking at online is credible or not. Callan, it feels like this is almost more vital, especially because of the rise of conspiracy theories, not just about the war in Ukraine, but about any number of things, and the power that they have built to kind of suck people into these rabbit holes that have pretty frightening real-world effects.
Absolutely, absolutely. Conspiracy theories can warp someone's mind from as young an age as 14. We're seeing really young people being affected by conspiracies, and knowing what's fact and fiction, being able to sort of determine what's misinformation, especially from these young ages, is really crucial, especially when we go through a crisis such as what's happening in Ukraine. There was one video on TikTok that was blowing up, and it was about an explosion that purported to be in Ukraine. Now, really what it was audio from an explosion in Beirut in 2020. And people at face value may not recognize this, and especially young people, again, who we know from studies can start believing conspiracy theories as early as age 14. It's harder for them to determine fact from fiction. So we know, again, to be really careful when we are seeing these images, especially during a crisis. We have to really stop and think about what we're being shown, what it sounds like. Is it coming from a credible news source? Is it coming from someone I trust? And having all these different tools at our fingertips, basically, to dispel conspiracies. It's our job as reporters to do that, and it is our job as citizens of a healthy social media landscape to make sure that we're not elevating content. There's also this idea on TikTok at this moment that Well, I can share misinformation if it's helping to raise awareness for something. And I think it's really important that we nip that in the bud and say that is not okay. Don't share misinformation, even if you think it's helping raise awareness for something like the crisis in Ukraine.
I feel like my one biggest piece of media literacy advice is the same advice for making friends. If your friend got something wrong, could you trust them to make it right? Could you trust them to apologize and correct their mistake? You can trust us to right our wrongs. Can you trust this account on TikTok or Instagram or wherever to acknowledge their mistake and fix it? Media Literacy 101. It's the same rule as with the people you let in your life. NBC's Colin Rosenblatt, we appreciate you talking us through this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
The war in Ukraine is costing Russia business, including in space. The world's top space agencies are cutting ties over the invasion of Ukraine. It could even affect the International Space Station. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard has that story.
Russia's deadly war on land is now impacting international efforts far beyond, in space.
It'll degrade their aerospace industry, including their space program.
Pointed words from President Biden announcing sanctions on Russia after the first days of the invasion. Now Russia symbolically removing other countries' flags from its rockets, including the United States. Russia's space director in a tweet saying the rockets were now, quote, more beautiful, prompting former NASA astronaut Scott Kelly to respond, without those flags and the foreign exchange they bring in, your space program won't be worth a damn. Maybe you can find a job at McDonald's if McDonald's still exists in Russia.
The space program has always risen above, geopolitical issues here on the ground, if you will. And this really puts a huge impact and hampers the international relations on the space station. So it's very concerning.
The structural ramifications of this wedge, consequential. In retaliation, Russia says it will no longer supply the U.S. with the RD-180, a major engine used in several American rockets. Russia's space director saying on Russian state TV, quote, let them fly on something else, their broomsticks.
How does Russia's refusal to supply additional engines for these rockets impact U.S. efforts?
There's several companies all throughout the country that are developing new engines and new launch vehicles. I think we're going to be fine. And I think it's going to hurt Russia then far more than it'll hurt the United States.
The European Space Agency is also distancing itself, saying it is, quote, very unlikely it will go forward with a joint mission this year to launch and land a robot on Mars. Russia even suggesting they'd allow the International Space Station to crash. Their space director tweeting, who will save the ISS from an uncontrolled deorbit and fall into the United States or Europe?
I think that relationship may be changed forever. I'm not sure that it could ever go back to what it was.
The International Space Station, though, currently occupied by 7 astronauts, including 4 Americans and 2 Russians.
How tied together are each nation's efforts in space?
So for the space station, it's highly coordinated. We're talking about a facility the size of a football field that is in orbit, and that takes a lot of energy and highly coordinated efforts.
That's Vaughn Hilliard reporting. Before we go tonight, an update on an image that's been making the rounds the past few days. On Wednesday, Mariana survived an airstrike in Mariupol. Russian forces hit a maternity ward and a children's hospital. That was her then, and this is her today. She gave birth in Mariupol alongside her husband. It was a girl named Veronica. Thanks for making time for us this week. Next week, our panel will answer your questions on this war. Any question, nothing too big or small. Send them to us at NBC Now Tonight on social media. Leave us a voicemail or email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. We'll see you Monday. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.